Interpretation is something slightly different from simple analysis, though analysis always has its interpretive moment, because in interpretation, we demonstrate how the object of our quest engages us. And that engagement is a form of self-experience, cast into and received back from a significant object of otherness. In the case of Costa Lima's Atotô de l'armé, the interpretation of self-experience shows how the composer's complex negotiations of cultural and historical identities, both collective and personal, creates a powerful aesthetic and intellectual impact. The most salient musical materials brought to bear in this splendid work come from three sources, or rather three extraordinarily rich musical traditions. The complex, exuberantly hybrid world of Brazilian popular song and dance, the differently heterogeneous discourse of the international musical avant-garde of the late 20th century, and, in a more attenuated way, a deep ancestor to them both, a richly generative compositional conversation from late medieval and early modern Europe. It is this last source that will allow me to begin. L'Armé, the armed man of the title, first of all refers to a historically important popular song of this name. If you will pardon my voice, thanks to all the travel, I'll sing the tune as it has come down to us as a melodic lyrical item. Let me skip ahead here. Like many tunes of this sort, it exists in several variants. This particular one I'm going to sing in the Dorian mode and with additional decorative extensions of the tune is one of the more common. Lama, lama, l'armé, l'armé doit-on douter, on a partout crié, que chacun se vienne aimer de nos brigands de fer. Lama, l'armé, doit-on douter. Times and tastes having changed, casual audiences in the 21st century are more likely than not to experience that tune as jaunty, rather cheerful maybe, for even in the Dorian mode's minor cast. We can note in particular the clear musical structure, an ABA melody with sturdy fourths and fifths articulating the octave and framing the concluding melodic descents of each section in the tune. We can note the regular triple meter with the distinctive rhythm known familiarly as Lombard rhythm or the Scotch snap. In comparison to the tune, however, the text is rather alarming. Who is this mysterious armed man who brings fear to one and all? Why should everybody run and buy armor? And why indeed, and in what ways, should a little ditty about soldierly violence be so historically important? The tune, to spend a moment on historical excavation, may have come to audibility as a response to a great European historical trauma. That is, the fall of Constantinople to the armies of Mehmed II, the Ottoman emperor, in the year 1453. Ugh. Lest we forget, this was a moment of pure terror for European Christians. The later history of imperialism and domination has obscured the fact that Europe was simply a region among others in the 15th century world, and not the most advanced of those regions. That would have been China, followed by the Islamic world. Given the historical weight of Europe's post-Columbian impact, it's easy to forget that even into the 16th century, Western power was not uncontested. The Turks besieged the gates of Vienna in the time of Haydn's grandfather in 1683. But to condense my tale rapidly, the tune L'Armé rapidly lost any connection to the fall of Constantinople over the course of the late 15th century and began to circulate more widely in contexts that evoked both the more general fear of armed violence as well as its hoped-for transformation into a kind of sacred vengeance. And the tune's atmosphere of contest afforded an astonishing series of works in conversation with one another. In addition to references in secular songs and individual polyphonic works, sacred works, the tune formed the basis of over 40 polyphonic settings of the Mass Ordinary. And musical details of these works make clear that the pieces were commonly in dialogue, by which I mean emulation, rivalry, and everything in between with each other. Indeed, nearly every major composer between the 1480s and the 1520s, and quite a few in the century after that, essayed la marmée works in response to one another. And in the clarity and simplicity of that tune, made it a site of technical virtuosity par excellence. Nevertheless, it's quite possible to apprehend the anxieties about power and religion, about selves and others, in this case Christian selves and their Muslim others, sedimented into the seemingly simple tune. For the La Marmée tune was indeed a basis for challenge and contest among composers, but they were as often as not writing music for patrons who also had complex political agendas in mind. Agendas in which the dreaded Turkish presence was never far off. In fact, we can think, for instance, of such famous examples as the Banquet of the Oath of the Pheasant, which was a great extravaganza designed specifically to rouse the knights of France and the Burgundian provinces to launch another crusade to liberate Constantinople. And it involved probably works by Guillaume Dufay, etc. The echoing dismay of the fall of Constantinople provided a significant portion of the grim energies that powered the depredations of European pirate merchants and conquistadors of the early modern period. Never forget that mixed in with the greed and fear that led to the catastrophes of Tenochtitlan and Cajamarca were reminiscents of the long struggles for supremacy in the Mediterranean world. The rich heritage of mixtures of race and culture, of genocides complete or partial, slavery and peonage, occasional redemption and hard-won compromise. These were elements of a conversation in so many ways different in the New World, but in so many ways continuations of the old human tales of sorrow from the old. Costa Lima's work joins this ancient conversation in subtle and important ways. To begin with, the tune has actually moved its domicile not only temporally and culturally from 15th century Europe before the so-called Age of Exploration to late 20th century Brazil and the aftermath of Europe's brilliant, catastrophic, generative reach across the globe, but also to move its domicile generically from the contexts of highly socialized art for commission of the Renaissance to the more individualized, psychically dense, expressive practices of late modernist composition. Something of this translation can be heard in the work's opening strains, where the astringent modernist Stimmung of the initial bars and the shrill fife-like proclamation of the tune rapidly gives way to the accents of popular music in a kind of glorious tropical fantasia. The juxtaposition of styles is notable. In fact, this trait, a beautiful instance of what the Russian modernists refer to, well, the Russian post-Brezhnev modernists refer to as polystylism, could be considered a fundamental characteristic of much post-1970s concert music in the international framework. As such, its taste of sonic far-fetching is a form of generalized metalepsis, literalizing compressions of space and time in a decidedly self-aware, historicizing way. Returning to the work's relocation of genre from polyphonic mass to concert piece, it might be tempting to imagine this movement as some kind of secularization. Indeed, one important strand of discussions of modern art would place disenchantment with magic and religion as a major characteristic of modernity, except that Costa Lima's work clearly attempts something much more ambitious than simple secularization. Atotô, the title's first word, is of course a generic designation from Candomblé and Umbanda, a greeting especially to the Orisha I always say Babaluaye because I know about Santeria. Obaluaye, or Omulu, the deity responsible for diseases and their treatment, of healing and transformation. The special marker, by the way, of the avatar Omulu's domain was the horrific disease of smallpox. That, of course, is separately a topic for an entirely different, much longer and much darker discussion. And by the composer's own account, the rhythmic motifs of the opening, in addition to aspects of the work's proportional structure, reflect another sacred genre, the Aluja of Shango, Lord of thunderstorms, fire, and kingship. Rather than going into detailed formal description of such specific markers of sacred genres, however, I want to emphasize their wider referential function. All too easily, you know, in music studies, we neglect the less specific fields of interpretive significance in favor of the comforting pseudo-objectivity of formal vocabularies. But when we add to the music's conceptual and rhythmic matrix such a rich field of references to the harmonies and melodies of popular music, many of the formalist avant-garde questions I mentioned earlier suddenly seem beside the point. Instead, the lush array of associations is mobilized in unexpected ways that hail the work's listeners in unpredictably multiplicious fashion. The complex location of Amerindian, African, and European identities articulates an assortment of cultural moments that can be understood as elements in the corporate life and history of Brazil, in ways that my comments today can only gesture towards. At the same time, however, they offer themselves as instantiations of psychic life, as pretexts of what the psychoanalyst Christopher Bolas terms self-experience. Time will also not permit the exploration of psychic experience in any detail, although Bolas's points are deeply resonant with Costa Lima's important work on music and psychoanalysis. For now, in closing, let me note just a few important particulars. If one way of experiencing art is to take it as a kind of screen onto which we project various forms of psychic experience, only to have that experience transformed by contact with that work and then given back to us in transformed conditions, then the structural particulars of a work like Atotô armé show crucial things about that work's capacities to act as a screen. The intense richness of this music, particularly I think its polystylism, make it exceptionally powerful as a psychic screen. More specifically, the composer's careful choice of materials and their intricate and subtle ways that they are entangled through his fine compositional technique allow him to project a musical surface that is richly fractured and faceted, while it remains deeply unified in a way that provides a framework for a kind of integrated experience. That is, to borrow a related concept from the analyst Wilfred Bion, the work is a container and one of exceptional merit. Further reflections on the psychic densities that are mobilized in Costa Lima's musical works would find ample recompense. But I hope in my just brief remarks here, I've been able to touch on a side of his music that I believe will become increasingly important in future understandings of his work and its legacy. Obrigado.